California's governor making some big headlines today. Gavin Newsom and his economic task force sending a letter to Congress asking for an additional $1 trillion in federal aid to help state and local governments. Nearly 100 business leaders, including Disney's Bob Iger, former Fed Chair Janet Yellen, and Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff signed that letter. I sat down with the governor earlier today exclusively and asked him what would happen if Congress didn't pay up.
Public health, public safety is impacted. Public education is impacted very directly. That doesn't need to happen. The purpose of federal government is to keep people safe and also focus on the well-being of our citizens. At the end of the day, we're not looking for charity. We're not looking for a handout. We believe this is social responsibility. It's not a red issue. It's not a blue issue. It's not a large state issue or a small state issue. It's an American issue. You heard Jerome Powell himself today talk about the impact of this, the likes of which we've never seen in our lifetime. And so it's incumbent upon the federal government to do more and to do better at this moment. And not pointing fingers when I say that. I am just saying we have a shared responsibility to the American people, 40 million that live in the state of California.
The bill is already receiving some pushback, some opposition. We spoke to Senator Pat Toomey earlier on CNBC today. Here's what he had to say.
There's a real debate as to whether there should be any federal funding going directly to states and municipalities to replace lost revenue. Why is it that the federal government should be the source of this money? I mean, states and municipalities have taxing authority of their own.
How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fundamental central purpose of the federal government. What is, we should ask, the purpose of federal government, if not to protect its citizens and to address the issue of social responsibility at a time of great need? And let me just underscore the great need. If it's not obvious, it should be obvious to everybody. We have Depression-era unemployment. The numbers we've seen made public significantly understate the severity of the economic crisis in the United States of America. It's well north of 20% unemployment. And the reality is, as we toggle back, as we reopen the economy, California, roughly 90% of the economy now is conditionally reopened. You can't run a 90% economy. Consumer demand simply will not pick back up to where it was pre-pandemic. So if it's not obvious, the answer is why. It certainly will be over the course of the next weeks and months. And I hope not just Republican senators, but Democratic leaders across the spectrum recognize that and meet this moment.
Just to play devil's advocate, though, Governor, hasn't the federal government spent trillions already on programs such as PPP as well as stimulus checks to individuals? And that effectively is a support in a way, and maybe not a direct way, but a support for states. So why do you want the money to come directly to the coffers of your government?
Well, and I think when you look at it in those terms, it conjures a pejorative that somehow government is other than, as opposed to essential. When we talked a lot about essential, we talk about the essential nature of public safety, our first responders, our police officers, our firefighters, the essential nature, any parent, I've got 4 children, can attest to, of our teachers, our public educators, our nurses, our doctors. Those are the frontline county workers, city workers that potentially could be impacted if we walk away from this moment. The biggest mistake we often make in these moments is we don't recognize the moment, and we play small ball. And I think that would be a huge mistake in terms of our economic growth and economic recovery in this nation.
You're talking about the job losses across the country. In California specifically, Governor, do you think that you've seen the worst economic data, or is that to come as businesses reopen and start to feel their way through this post-pandemic or pandemic world that we are currently in?
I'd like to hope so. 4.8 million people filed unemployment insurance just since March 12th. 4.8 million Americans in the state of California just since March 12th. As we reopen the economy, and by the way, I know a thing or two about economy. I started in the private sector, pen to paper, opened 23 businesses. At peak, we have roughly 1,000 employees, restaurants, hotels, and wineries. I have a deep sense of understanding of the complexity of reopening in this respect. It's consumer demand that ultimately will determine our fate and future. And what's the predicate on that? Public health. To me, it's an and, not an or. It's not about the economy versus our public health. It's focusing on both, and that's fundamental in terms of instilling a sense of well-being where consumers can come back and feel confident and safe, and employees can come back and feel confident and safe. And that's going to take some time.
I want to talk about some of the businesses in your state. Elon Musk was upset with the Alameda authorities when he reopened the Fremont plant against their orders. He has since signaled that he would like to move Tesla headquarters out of the state, as well as future programs, future manufacturing plants, for instance, out of California, and has talked to state officials in Nevada as well as Texas. Are you concerned about losing some of your companies to other states because of the pandemic and just because taxes in California are high?
Well, the economic output in the state of California has been second to none, again, substantially outperforming the rest of the nation. I'll repeat, forgive me, we averaged 3.8% GDP growth over the last 5 years. The innovation, the entrepreneurial spirit runs through our veins. More startups, more engineers, more scientists, more researchers, more Nobel laureates in this state than any other state in the nation. We may not be the cheapest place to do business, but we're the best place to do business. And it shouldn't surprise you or anyone watching that innovation and research and development and that entrepreneurial spirit is still alive and well, despite this pandemic here in the state of California. I've known Elon for decades. I have great respect and admiration for his innovative spirit, and this state has been his partner in helping him grow his business. We're confident that he and others will thrive, not just survive in the future in this state. And so with respect to those that want to be taking advantage of this moment, no, California knows no equal as the 5th largest economy in the world, and we're investing in our future, and we'll invest in our growth engines, and we'll invest in our innovators.
So if he leaves, if Tesla leaves, you're not worried about replacing that company with another innovative technology and or manufacturing company?
Well, I'm not worried about that, but I'm also not worried about Elon leaving anytime soon. I've had a lot of conversations with him, and we're committed to the success of the innovation and the low-carbon green growth economy that he's been promoting for decades, and the state of California is accelerating in. I think it's in all our interest to continue to find areas of common ground, and that's, by the way, exactly what we did in the state of California with Tesla, and they were accommodated, and they began reopening as manufacturing and logistics and warehousing all across the state has operated and reopened in the last few weeks.
Some interesting trends are emerging in this pandemic world, Governor, and one is work from home. And there are a couple of companies, both run by Jack Dorsey, who say now that workers can permanently work from home, Square as well as Twitter. And I'm wondering if you're concerned that could mean a flight out of California cities, but B, out of the state in general.
No, I think that was a trend line that will become a headline. I think we've accelerated change that was already underway. I think some are promoting radical change. I believe we're just accelerating change that was underway. As it relates to telework, new work styles, work models, that was already happening with the merger of IT and globalization detonating at the same time. Something foundational has been happening in our economy for decades, and this pandemic has just clarified that focus. So I think it's going to require all of us to be more resilient, more respectful to the nature of change, and more capable of meeting a regulatory mindset that meets that change, not as an impediment, but to support it.
That was California Governor Gavin Newsom. You can see the full interview on CNBC.com. A couple of themes out of this, what he said about Elon Musk, what he said about work from home trends, but also reopening across the state. Tim.
Yeah, I think, first of all, this is, 5th largest economy in the world, $3.13 trillion. And we heard from the Fed's Rosengren this morning. Also, in addition to Powell, we need more fiscal and we need more monetary. I'm not so sure about the monetary, but there's no question this is a time for fiscal. So I do think that the trends that are taking place in terms of work from home and what this also might mean for commercial real estate and what that also might mean for the revenues of major urban centers is something we still haven't seen. I think that will be one of the have-not moments of the post-COVID-19 world that we live in. So I would just say, as a citizen, this is the time I need my federal government. And I think there are moments where we are going to have to step up. And it's interesting to hear the governor be so forthright about that, because I think that's exactly where California sits right now.
We have said on this show many times that recessions are an accelerant to pre-existing trends. And already in many high-tax states like New York, but California specifically, since that's one that we're talking about, has seen an outflow of residents. And they've actually seen an outflow, a loss of residents for 7 straight years, Karen. And I'm wondering if you think this work-from-home trend could really challenge states like California, because if you don't need to be in San Francisco and pay $1 million for a studio apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment, you're going to leave.
Right. You're going to leave. I mean, I think, just anecdotally hearing that already, I think that is going to be a big pressure on California. And I think some of this was starting before any of this. The cost of doing business in California was already very high, and we saw a lot of exodus to Texas, where it was much more business friendly. I think the first few trillion, Congress was sort of all trying to work together. It really was bipartisan. I think the next trillion or more will be a lot more difficult, and it can't help but be somewhat political. California, obviously, very much a blue state, so it's. I think it's going to be a little bit of it's going to be difficult for them. I don't know that they'll get the relief they need.
And I wonder if Elon Musk knows what the governor just said about him leaving, and if that is actually correct. Maybe we'll hear from Musk himself.